first program. The views expressed are those of the guests and not necessarily those of the producer. Today's topic.
Are fanatics terrified of girls' education in Passion for Truth award-winning program?
Welcome to another edition of Passion for Truth. Are fanatics terrified of girls' education? Is it because women have the most power to transform our society and save the country from violence? Should the West stop investing in military male toolbox and instead invest in the girls' education toolbox? Well, how about that? We'll talk about next. Chuck Woolery, formerly with the World Federalist Association, whose job is to strengthen UN. Dr. Joseph Annunziata, with expertise on international affairs. As a professor, Dr. Annunziata has worked as an advisor to the Assistant Secretary of Defense on international issues. He was a senior staff member at the White House. And Cindy Kinney, grants and contracts manager at an academic medical center in Virginia. And Fred Peterson, a senior advisor to members of Congress on defense and counterterrorism issues. Welcome you all. Starting with you, Chuck. If we invest in the education toolbox, do we have better chances of defending militancy?
Absolutely. Looking all the way back to Afghanistan and Charlie Wilson's War, if you've ever seen that movie, just the importance of education as a foundation of any civil society, and what's taught is actually important too. But you open with the question: Are the radicals afraid of these intelligent women? I think, yeah, all men are. I don't have to be radical to be afraid of intelligent women. Yes, yeah.
Joe, what do you say? The Boko Haram kidnapped some of the brightest girls in the region and announced plans to sell them as slaves. Were they terrified of the girls?
Yes, I think so, especially girls who are barefoot and pregnant and poor, because once they get educated, then they begin to speak out, and they have higher senses of morality than so many men who run the world. They say if you educate a woman, you educate a family. And the women are the ones who raised the men who are causing the wars in the world today.
When terrorists, Cindy, in Nigeria organized attacks on girls' school, you wonder what they were scared of.
Well, as I did a little research on this, it seems that this wasn't the first thing that they've done, this group, that they kidnapped they killed a bunch of boys, so I just think they're escalating their fanaticism and not necessarily, I won't say necessarily targeting the girls, but that it just was a progression from my perspective of what I researched, that the girls were a convenient target. They were all at that school, and they could make a big splash and take them all. But I think that's just their way of behaving.
Should we, Fred, stop fighting Al-Qaeda affiliates in Yemen and Pakistan with drones and instead invest in girls' schools in these countries?
I think one thing that we are somehow talking around is that this is not just a war on women that is going on, but it is a war on women that is a religious point of view about the worth and position of women in society. These were Christian girls, no one has mentioned that, that were kidnapped by a radical Islamic group that resented their being educated. This was not necessarily aimed at the women as much as it was aimed at the religion, and there have been Christian churches that have been burned to the ground with the people inside, and there have been other major atrocities that are being committed there. This is a war by a religious point of view. For us to take sides is to take sides against the mindset that goes into the crimes that are being committed. And I quite well agree with the other panelists that these women need to be defended, not just with Twitter passing comments that are gone in a day or a week, but a consistent policy of support for what women are going through in parts of the world in the name of a religion.
Okay, you talk about religion. Let me ask, Chuck in it. Does religion play any part here? I mean, is it poverty and corruption, not religion, that drives the majority of the group's recruitment? We are talking about Boko Haram.
Yeah, well, let me first say I agree with Fred completely that these girls should have been defended against, and that there's actually, I would say, a failure in religion, both in the Christian religion and the Muslim religion, about not protecting human life everywhere the same. That right now in our culture, we don't value the people that are being killed elsewhere because they're different than us. They're different skin color, there might be a different religion. And so I think basically all religions fundamentally are the same and love one another, protect one another. So religion, we've failed religion in that sense. But the bigger issue, I think, is not the religious differences in Nigeria. It's actually the economic differences. That Fred, I think if you did a little more reading on this, you'd find out that Nigeria just surpassed South Africa as the richest African country, and there are 100 million Nigerians living on less than $1 a day, and 70% of those are in the north. And so most of the people who are involved in this kidnapping are not radical fundamental religious extremists. They're just dirt poor.
Yeah, is it, Cindy, is it poverty? Is it poverty and corruption, not religion, that drives the Boko Haram's motives to attack?
I think they feed each other. You have set the stage with poverty and corruption, and the religious overlay just adds to it.
Let me make a note here that I have done study on this, and I have had relations with high officials within the Nigerian government and within their political area. So and I know that the population of Nigeria, I don't know whether you're aware of it now, exceeds all of Western Europe combined right now. Their population is
170 million.
Astronomical compared with our understanding of their role in and also the rich in resources and why those resources cannot be returned to the people. You're right, there is endemic poverty there, but it's a poverty not just of exploitation, it's a poverty of policy.
Well, actually,
of government.
Yeah, and the people you spoke to in Nigeria are actually the people with all the money. But your numbers on the population, I think, are way off.
I didn't tell you who I spoke with.
Well, you said you had high-level officials in the Nigerian government. They're the rich, they're the corrupt, they're the ones with all the
ministers in churches.
Okay,
and
but the population issue, I think
leaders
you're way
of
off
human rights groups.
I think the Nigerian population is 170 million, which puts that much smaller than the European population.
Let me have Cindy. Cindy, do fanatics see women as agents of change? I mean, when Pakistani Taliban shot Malala in the head and Afghan military Taliban threw acid on the faces of girls who were seeking education, what does that tell us about dynamics? What dynamics are playing out here?
I think they view women as property, not as agents of change. They're property. Chattel. They're not even human. In some respects, they don't get to vote. They don't get to drive in some countries. They don't have any economic power. They don't have any political power. They're property.
So if the girls are educated in these countries, do you think it might change the demography?
It's possible.
That they will have...
But, if they don't have... It's going to be a generational thing. I don't think it could happen overnight by any stretch. They're going to have to... generations.
Well, I think women have been relegated to a lower status to men for centuries, and not only in Muslim countries, but even in Christian countries and in Hindu countries and other religious groups have somehow managed to consider women as chattel, their property, and that doesn't put him at the same level as men. So that there is a danger, there's a threat to many men who control countries today, that if we allow too many women to get too educated, they're going to start dictating policies, which they are concerned about.
Research indicates, Chuck, that if you educate girls, they would have a significantly smaller family. This way you can reduce the youth bulge in the backward countries and boost the economy. Does that make sense?
Oh, it not only makes sense scientifically. I mean, the studies that are done by all the demographers, they show that for every year that a girl has of schooling she has, there's a certain percentage of less likelihood she'll have a child, another child. Both postpone and have fewer children and postpone them. So, it's a clear link between a female's education and the number of children they have. And by reducing the number of unhappy people there are in a country, you certainly reduce the risk of a need to pull troops in there or to bring in instability. Yeah, there's no question about that.
Similar things, Fred, happened in Oman and Yemen, and now they are stable countries compared to their neighbors. Because, when Bangladesh got independence from Pakistan, it emphasized education for girls. Educated girls became the backbone of banks, other department organizations, government industry. Do these countries inspire, international attention?
If the question to the panel is, should women be educated to the limit of their capacity and desire, I think you would get a unanimous opinion. That question becomes complicated when cultures actively, vigorously oppose this change in a cultural tradition that goes back millennia. Not only that, but is compounded by religious strictures on the development of women, a vast strength and resource of the population. So while we may agree philosophically on the desirability, both economically and socially and morally, to develop the woman as a resource within a country, we must not deny the fact that we are running up against
The
cultural prohibitions against this, and we should tread very carefully.
Okay, but
because offending the culture endangers conflict and can provoke the very thing that we are trying to oppose.
But if they are educated, they will probably have lesser families. It will reduce the youth bulge, and it would change
Agreed.
the demography of the country.
Quite agreed.
And once it changes the demography of the country, do you think that might change also the culture of the country?
But yes, agreed to all of that, yes. But how to do that? Do we come in and impose our superior Olympian wisdom
No, but
on
the money
the
would help.
lesser ignorant people who don't quite get it? And do we extend this superior wisdom on the panel's part by the bayonet and the bullet?
It's not a
I
question
don't think
of
so.
imposing it on it. It's just affording the opportunity for young girls to go to school.
Yeah, and
in
how do you
Africa,
do that?
in many villages, a girl may get to the 3rd grade, and that's it. She's cut off.
Quite agreed.
Doesn't need any more education because she's going to get married and she's going to cook and take care of the men.
And they lose a valuable
if
resource.
you give the opportunity to continue through elementary, through high school, through university, that's all they need. They just
Absolutely.
need the opportunity.
Access-
Nobody's imposing it.
Access to money is the fundamental barrier to educating children. The families, if they have money, they will invest that money in children. If there are teachers, if there are schools. In Haiti, I have a school project in Haiti that I've been working on for way too long. It costs only $5 a year to educate a child and to pay for teachers. It's a very, very remote and underpaid region. But the idea that the parents just don't have the money, we actually have to provide that scholarship to them.
Okay, he makes an interesting point, Cindy. If the West invests in education toolbox, do we have better chances of defeating militancy?
I think if you invest in the education, then there is hope that as people are educated, they can improve their life. And then the need for militancy is then diminished a bit because they have a better life. Why would you ruin it? So, by fighting and all that.
But as it stands, now we are investing more in the military toolbox and relegating this question to the background.
Let me make this point. In Pakistan, where you have, I think, maybe 60 to 70% of the people, the children who are illiterate, and there is not a cultural thing about for women being educated mostly, there is no government money being spent to educate. There's very little government money being directed at educating children. So what they do is they ask for money from Saudi Arabia, and that money goes into the madrasas. So the madrasas are the primary educational tool in Pakistan because the government has not done its job, because the morality or the ethic culture of the people has not put education as a top priority. If you look at World War II, after World War II ended, people got together and decided, what can we do to possibly prevent another world war? And education, universal access to education, one of those primary goals of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And then in 1990, all the world leaders got together and said, well, maybe we should make sure all the children have enough money for education. And they signed a pledge to make that money available. It didn't happen. And I believe today we're seeing the consequences of that failure in terms of terrorism, in terms of environmental degradation, in terms of international crime, in terms of just many of the problems that we're seeing because we don't have an educated world to invest in.
Okay, so why do such acts of terrorism not inspire international action? Could it be that when such incidents happen in backward countries, their leaders portray the victims as unavoidable result of a fanatical insurgency for which their government cannot be blamed? We'll touch that subject next. Stay with us. A major problem, Fred, with these countries is that they want to propagate a good image of their government, even if it means arresting the protesters and accusing them of smearing the government and of fabricating the reports. So you do not get authentic information from these countries.
That's stipulated. Certainly that's correct. A good image is good business. And sometimes the image, you want to see who is behind the curtain. And it's many layers of curtain that one has to get through, particularly in some of these governments that have been, they're kleptocracies. The people at the top, the oligarchy, steals from the people to produce for themselves. And they will create any image the world needs in order to enable them to continue their theft. What they are stealing is a tremendous, in this case at hand, is a tremendous resource of their own population. That's an educated half of the population, which is their women. They are losing that resource, and they could become far richer, not to say also far more correct and moral by doing that which is right. And yet they somehow don't get it. The question is, what does the world do about it? Do we go in and impose our will on them, or do we attempt to use moral suasion and economic tools to encourage that which we're trying to change? And that is a difficult assignment because it's a culture, but not necessarily individuals.
But it's sort of like the chicken and the egg thing, you know.
Indeed.
Is it the culture that creates it, or is it the people that create the culture, as was said earlier? There's a famous play of Shakespeare, I forget which one, is it Richard III or something, in which revolutionaries want to take over the government. They get together and they say, the first thing we have to do is get rid of the educated people. Because if they're dumb and stupid, they can control them a lot more easily. So I think that's the modus operandi of a lot of these backward countries.
Yeah, I got to speak to either captain or lieutenant. I apologize for not knowing. A battalion commander? What would that be?
That would be probably a lieutenant colonel.
Okay. He was
lieutenant colonel.
He had spent a couple of years in both Iraq and in in Afghanistan serving, and he noticed this interesting difference between the both cultures there. In that, if you offered money for the Iraqi children to go to school, the parents would jump on it. but there wasn't enough money to send them to school, and that was a problem. And building schools was a big issue. But in Afghanistan, it wasn't a big deal. They didn't care that much about it. They wanted more economic opportunities than they did the education. So I just thought it was an interesting distinction.
But interestingly enough, Cindy, if their government is dysfunctional, and we're talking about these backward countries, why do they blame Western morals for the country's corruption, for the country's other problems? Why do they turn to West?
Because that's convenient. Yeah, right. I mean, it's the other guy. It's not our fault. We're doing everything we can do, right? It's them. I mean, that's what happens all over the place.
Can I answer that?
Where the money is.
Nice to find a
I'll give you another
scapegoat.
slant on it. Yeah, it's. I think that there is a corruption in the West from the amount of money that we do have. We have entirely so much money that we have so much freedom to do whatever we want to do, and whether you look at the pornography, the amount of money spent on sports, the amount of money spent on makeup or expensive cars or homes or whatever, when just a small fraction of that, a tiny percentage of that, spent educating the world or taking care of health needs around the world, would provide so much more economic benefit to all of us. But we have failed morally in the use of our capitalist system in terms of making sure that people in need, those needs are met. And we meet our greed, our need, far more than our needs. So there is a problem with Western culture that I don't think they're responding to that. I don't think that's the reason why they're doing it. But it's certainly a contributing factor to the fundamental causes of what's going on, I think, in much of the world today.
I was at the United Nations when they were developing the Millennium Goals of the UN, and one of the goals was to encourage the developed countries to contribute, I think it was 1% or 3% of their gross national product to eliminating poverty. And they all agreed to those goals in principle. But here it is 15 years later. It was supposed to be done by the year 2015. Hardly any of the countries have met those goals. In principle, they agreed we want to educate and bring people out of poverty, but in fact, they don't want to spend the money.
And we keep saying it's an issue of money, but when you look at it, the amount of money needed to actually do it is, I think American males spend about $50 billion a year drinking beer. Just in terms of proportions.
No, don't cut into my
maybe
beer
60
fund.
billion. Yeah, I don't want to get into that. Maybe 60 billion, but it would take less than that
Chuck,
to ensure.
Nigeria is the biggest economy in Africa.
Yeah.
It's the biggest economies, and the reason why perhaps it has given rise to Boko Haram is because it's not that religion is playing as much part, but people are sick and tired of their government stealing the nation's wealth.
Yeah.
They are the ones, the ordinary Nigerians see very little of those profits. So no oil wealth reaches the ordinary people. And 70% live below the poverty line.
Yeah.
So the question is, who's controlling the government?
Who is controlling
that's
the
stealing all these
stealing
funds?
money. So then you wonder, why should the West be so darn concerned about investing in these peoples which are the richest themselves?
Well, we don't invest in the people. We invest in the people who are doing the corruption because we want part of the take. You know, it's good business. You know, to work with other countries, the rich people in other countries. It's good business.
There's also an argument to be made, and I want to be literally perhaps the devil's advocate here. There is also an argument for stability. Stability is the enemy not only of business, or instability is the enemy not only of business, but it's the enemy of the common people as well. And if there is chaos and lawlessness and instability within a country, the lack of education for women will be the least of their problems. So the argument for stable governments that create a peaceful environment is a step in the right direction. Although that step may be done wrongly, I think, for the wrong reasons, for economic gain, stability is an achievement.
Okay.
But,
We'll be
Sure.
right back with our closing comments. Stay with us, Passion for Truth. talking
Yeah.
about why are fanatics terrified of girls' education, and one final thought from each of our panelists. Should the West stop investing in the military toolbox and instead invest in girls' education toolbox? Starting with you, Fred.
We have interests. The United States as a country has interests. The world has interests. Interests are achieved by military means when other means, perhaps less expensive, may be also available. I think that to protect U.S. interests, we must maintain a strong military and a strong military presence. Otherwise, we're not taken seriously, and our other value interests will not be achieved. But I think it's a false dichotomy to think that we have to choose one or the other.
Okay.
I would choose to do both and do them smartly.
Cindy?
Very
briefly.
I was going to say. I don't think it's either or. I think you have to have military investment and the social, economic, educational investment as
Joe?
well.
I think as much as most people give lip service to the need for stability, those who gain most from controlling a country prefer instability, because the instability gives them the opportunity to control things the way they want to. So instability and chaos and war and civil strife is an advantage for those people who are greedy and want to make money out of the situation.
You have the last word, Chuck.
Yeah, I think we do have interests, but we also have values. And the degree to which our values, valuing human life, valuing education, valuing investments in people, rather than the machinery that we want to control or try to stabilize country for our interests, I think our best interest is in walking our values, not period.
And that's all the time we have. We'll bring you another edition.
It's a good
of
period.
Passion for
I'm
Truth.
glad we ended the show on a period, not an exclamation point.
Thank you.
If you have any question, comment, or suggestion on this program, please send us an email at mschawla@hotmail.com or write to us at 1011 Salt Meadow Lane, McLean, Virginia 22101. You can also access these TV programs and the radio programs archived on the internet at your own time on the internet at our page www.passionfortruthtv.com. Please watch these TV programs every week at the same station and at the same time, and send your comments to mschawla@hotmail.com.